Recognizing the House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a series of questions this morning and this afternoon, and I very much appreciate the work of the Minister of Housing and the staff of the Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs, and just want to start by acknowledging that housing and local government issues in this province are something that we have all worked on extensively, me more recently, as it's issues that are top of mind for British Columbians. I'd like to begin my questions by focusing on renter protections. And Mr. Chair, renters are among the hardest hit by the housing crisis and face significant challenges in finding and keeping homes they can afford. This is a particular issue in BC, which continues to have the highest eviction rates in Canada. Furthermore, the 2023 BC Eviction Survey found that 25% of overall evictions end in homelessness. So we have the highest eviction rate, and a quarter of those evictions end in homelessness. The question through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister is, how is your ministry addressing the housing needs of low-income renters, many of whom are at high risk of eviction and homelessness? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I too want to appreciate my friend across the way's advocacy for housing. He's very consistent in his advocacy, and I think that's what people send us here for. And so I want to thank him for that, and my office is always open and available to him for conversations around challenges that may pertain to his community. Of course, the need to support renters is top of mind for us as a government. I can share with the member that we've taken several steps at the RTB to protect renters. Everything from when a proponent or landlord wants to do major renovations to their building, they now have to apply. That application process ensures that the rents that are being charged to ensure that they can cover the cost of the renovations are fair. A member will know that we last year launched a new digital tool, an online tool for the personal use eviction. And we understand that if a mom and pop landlord has a place, and they may need that. And there's a lot of situations where that is actually a real need in a person's home. Family members moving back in, the list goes on. To strike a balance between the two, we launched a digital tool which now requires anyone wanting to use personal use eviction to put information, some basic information online, and sign or click a disclaimer with an understanding that they're doing it following the law. We've seen from that a significant shift in attitude from folks. We've also ensured that if someone is caught not doing things by the law, that there's a more significant fine. And we did that because people at some time will say, well, it's a 3-month fine or 6-month fine, and the amount rent we'll get for increase makes sense to just kick people out anyways, and we can increase the rents. And so we had to increase that to ensure that there was a barrier there to protect people. So that's on the RTB side. The member will also be aware that we have now 3 months for when a personal use eviction happens, so that families have time to be able to find another place, make adjustments, because we know that's a really challenging thing and a stressful thing. And all these changes were possible because of the good work of my colleague, the minister responsible for tourism, arts and culture, the previous MLA that was in your seat, Adam Olsen. They worked closely together. I believe my colleague from North Vancouver was on the committee as Courtney Comox, my colleague from Courtney Comox was on that committee as well. Did a lot of good work of giving us ideas on how we can address those challenges, and we have been able to implement a lot of those changes. So it was a cross-party lines approach, and certainly helped a lot of people. The second piece I would highlight to protect renters is our efforts to increase housing supply. Increasing housing supply is about giving people who rent or buy some power in the marketplace. And I believe it's a supply and demand measure. If there's a limited supply, the power is not in the hands of renters, because there's not many options available, and they don't have the ability to move. So our efforts to increase housing supply, our small-scale multi-unit legislation, our transit-oriented development is about giving renters power in the marketplace. Lastly, we have been making historic investments. I won't go through all of them because the members got a lot of questions, but those investments are intended to help some of those low-income renters that I know the member cares deeply about. And the member will know that we have the Indigenous Housing Fund, which has made historic levels of investment both on and off reserve housing in Indigenous communities. We are the only province in the country that is investing in Indigenous housing on reserve because we couldn't wait for the federal government any longer. We have the Community Housing Fund that has a mix in the building. The member is aware of this. 20% are shelter rates, so approximately $500 a month rent. We've got 50% rent geared to income, so it's appropriate to people's income, and some units that are market. And that ensures that the buildings have a mix of people and mix of incomes living. I think it's healthier for communities to have that. And lastly, the Rental Protection Fund is huge. And I know the member's a fan of that. He's spoken many times about the value of the Rental Protection Fund. But this fund, which is operated by the BC Not-for-Profit Association, the BC Co-op Association, and the Aboriginal Management Housing Association, $500 million investment from the province is to protect renters. There is nothing more stressful for families when they see a building, in front of their building, a for sale sign. And the ability for our not-for-profit partners to go in, acquire these buildings, do upgrades to the buildings, protect people and their rents so they can have stability in their lives has been instrumental. It's had huge impacts, and I'm really proud of the impacts it's had. In fact, now it looks like the federal government is going to scale this to across the country, which is fantastic. Over 50% of the purchases last year of all buildings, purpose-built rental buildings in the province were done by the Rental Protection Fund. That is a significant shift of housing from the private side to the not-for-profit side. And the positive news for those in the private side is many of those investments, some of them have been REITs, in fact. REITs have said, you know what, we are going to get out of this space, we'll sell this to the not-for-profit space, and we will invest those dollars in new purpose-built rentals because they think that's a better space for them to be. And so I think it's a win-win for everyone involved. And there's a whole host more, but I know the members got lots of questions, so I'll continue.
Thank you, Minister. Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Yes, thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Chair. In looking at the various components the Minister has outlined, I'd follow up on a number of items. First of all, in relation to the residential tenancy branch, both the BC Supreme Court and the Community Legal Assistance Society of BC have raised concerns about the procedural fairness of the residential tenancy branch in relation to tenants. And so I have two questions. How, through the chair, how will the minister work to improve procedural fairness at the residential tenancy branch to ensure the rights of tenants are protected? And secondly, how will the minister improve the timeliness of residential tenancy branch determinations, and what funding exists to do so?
Minister.
Thank you so much, Chair, and congrats and welcome, to the students from Hazel Grove. My colleague just introduced you, and we are debating right now the budget for the Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs. And so this is an opportunity for your MLA and the colleagues that are in the place to ask me any questions about how we're spending money, what's happening with our programs, and it's part of the accountability that happens in government. So welcome to the place, and hope you enjoy the debate. Thanks to the member for the question. So there's two pieces. One is around procedural fairness. So there's been substantial steps taken to address some concerns. First, we've enhanced the dispute resolution process. So the RTB dispute resolution process is designed to provide open and consistent and efficient opportunities for parties to present their cases. So now we have included, as of last year, translation services with over 200 languages. And so that's available to anyone that is coming in. There's actually also Indigenous languages that are included in it. So it's a pretty amazing new initiative. We also now are providing audio recordings of the hearings so that there's more fairness and people are able to review that audio later if they need to. Parties have a process now to request a review or a correction of RTB decisions. So that's an important piece. The RTB provides access to anonymized past tenancy dispute decisions, so helping parties understand similar cases and how they were resolved. And of course, we're moving towards sharing non-harmonized monetary orders online and doing a lot of work to try to improve consistency. So the second part of the member's question, we certainly had challenges at the RTB, especially coming out of COVID, because a lot of folks were stuck in their place, and then all of a sudden the cases piled up, not only BC, across the country. And we had significant wait times when we, we had significant wait times. And so we took a couple of steps. First, we invested a significant amount of dollars. In fact, it was the first few weeks of me becoming the Minister of Housing to hire more adjudicators to improve the process. We also passed legislation last fall to kind of cut red tape out of the system. Things like when a person came forward with a dispute, we were required to book a date right from the beginning. And if it was resolved, we had no choice but to keep that meeting till the end, and often they were canceled. So a lot of spots were left open. We changed that process, and we included in the beginning a facilitated process. So landlord and tenant can come together. There's a facilitator that tries to resolve those challenges. I believe the latest number we have on resolution through the adjudication process is,
So 75% reduction from 12 to 3.
we've seen a reduction of no, this is not the one. Member, give me 1 second. I'll give you the exact numbers.
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't have the right number in front of me. I wanted to make sure I put the right numbers in play. Since we introduced this dispute process, we've seen 80% of those cases that went through a dispute process to be resolved before they needed a hearing date. So we've had the ability to divert a lot of adjudication time to resolve this. And you know, this is important because a lot of the time the cases come forward, there's just misunderstanding. And so this allowed us to do that. Overall wait times are now all within the service standards that we had set. And that is a massive shift from where we were a year and a half ago. We've seen a 75% reduction in wait times for unpaid rent and utilities, a 72% reduction in wait times for security deposit hearings, a 72% reduction in wait times for all hearings overall. And in fact, the challenge in our role, and I was sharing this with colleagues yesterday, is sometimes your success becomes a challenge. And now we are hearing from both landlord advocates and tenant advocates that the hearings are happening too fast and they don't have time to prepare legal, I guess, findings for those hearings. So it's moving too quickly now, and there's other concerns that are being raised. But that being said, it's heading in the positive direction, and now we have some of the lowest wait times in the entire country. And just under 2 years ago, we had some of the highest in the country. So it's been a huge shift over there, but we're going to continue to work on modernizing that as we go forward.
Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the areas that comes into play in our efforts to address the housing crisis in this province, particularly as it relates to renters, is the policy option of rent control and in particular vacancy control. So my question through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister is, does the Minister's housing plan include any form of rent control and in particular vacancy control that could moderate rent increases overall and limit evictions for profit to protect renters?
Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, member, for the question. Just previous to lunch, we were discussing the many measures we've taken to ensure protection for renters, and I mentioned that in order to do those changes, we had created a task force, which included the member's predecessor, the Minister for Tourism, Arts and Culture, and the former MLA for Courtney Comox, where they traveled the province to identify what the greatest needs were, what could work, but used data to help advise us on what measures we should be doing as we go forward. On the question of vacancy control, that task force recommended against it. They recommend against moving in that direction. We know that New York, for example, has vacancy control, but they are facing some serious challenges right now around, because of vacancy control, those buildings are not seeing the investments to be fixed up, and it's causing additional challenges to the community. So because of that recommendation, government made a clear commitment that we were not going to proceed in that direction. And, but we do have protections in place. Right now, rents are limited to be increased to CPI. We release that number every year so that there's some protection for renters. Landlords have the ability to increase rents above that if they need to do renovations of their properties, but they apply and they get permission given to them. So we have systems in place to ensure some protections, unlike a few provinces that exist. And of course, as I mentioned to the member before the break, one of the most important things we can do to help renters, to give renters power in the marketplace, is by increasing supply. And that's the work that we've been doing as a government.
Thank you, Minister. House Leader of the third party.
Thank you for the answer, Minister. I'll illustrate the basis for the next question with an example, but there are examples I expect throughout the province that the Minister hears about on a regular basis, and we all hear about on a regular basis. On Salt Spring Island, in my riding, there is a massive housing crisis. And the result is, because of the lack of affordable housing, that we have over 100 boats in the harbor where individuals are living aboard the boats because that's the only accommodation they can find. This amount of boats, sailboats, all sorts of boats in the harbor is causing significant environmental impact. And actually recently a couple of the boats have sunk in the harbor. The people living aboard those boats are not living there out of choice. They're living there because there is not access to affordable housing on Salt Spring Island. And so to complicate matters further, on Salt Spring, there's a large number of individuals and families who are living in trailers and other types of accommodation that is far from being healthy and safe, but is effectively the only accommodation that they can afford that is available. And so that just has created a huge housing crisis, and it impacts people on Salt Spring who work on Salt Spring, work in shops on Salt Spring. It's not about accommodating an influx. It's about the people who are on Salt Spring right now. The question that keeps coming up when I meet with Salt Spring residents and constituents is there's not an infinite budget to tackle the housing crisis, and there is a process through BC Housing, which is entirely appropriate, that is at arm's length. The question that keeps coming up from constituents is how are funds allocated as between rural communities and urban communities, and within rural communities to tackle this issue. And so there's a concern on Salt Spring that they have a housing crisis. What are the criteria in terms of the funds that could be available for eligible projects? And so for the constituents that are listening into this or attending community meetings, it would be helpful to have an explanation of how that allocation decision is made. Not for an individual project, but for rural versus urban and within rural.
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the member for raising some of the complexities that the member is seeing in his community and the things that he's hearing. I'm certainly aware of the challenges that are faced in Salt Spring. I had many opportunities to engage with the member, of course, on this topic and his predecessor as well, and add to that the complexity of how difficult it is to actually build housing on Salt Spring Island as a challenge. I can share a couple things with the member. I can share with the member that Salt Spring, the elected officials there, are apprised of the situation. They're seeing the benefit of the short-term rentals registry and the actions we've taken on short-term rentals across the province. And they have actually written to us requesting that we include them in the principal residence requirement. They see an opportunity for them to have more housing. They see the challenge, which is a lot of people are buying up properties in their communities, and there's people locally can't find housing, and they can't find workforce to operate the businesses. And it's having a huge impact, as the members rightfully raised. So Salt Spring has asked for that. That's something that I'm considering at this time. And I think that will help. That will help immediately for that community. The second thing I could share with the member is that we have made investments to the question around how do we decide between rural communities and non-rural communities. I think it's important to note that we don't fund just affordable housing in cities. We do fund housing in rural communities. I can share with the member that we have opened 80 units of housing over the last few years on Salt Spring. We have opened 22 units on Crofton Brook Phase 2. We have opened another 34 units at Crofton Brook Phase 3. And the member will probably be aware of the Salt Spring Commons. That's 176 Bishop's Walk Road. 24 units there of affordable housing. And we have right now under construction some units on Drake Road, as the member's probably aware as well. Also, we have supportive housing at that site. So there's about 32 units that are under development right now on that site. And of course, we want to look for more opportunities. I shared with members yesterday that part of the learning that BC Housing has put in, some of the feedback they've put in, is that now the Community Housing Fund applications will be, so to speak, rolling. So that if someone applies and they are not successful, they have an opportunity still within that approximate year to apply again by updating their application. So we are trying to be as flexible as we can, because at the end of the day, we want to see housing and we want to see all communities see the benefit of that. And those flexibilities are built into this. And I appreciate the members' comments around the fairness piece. All the decisions go through a fairness commissioner, so that it's clear that these decisions are being made with a data-informed lens.
House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Minister. And through the chair, it would be helpful to understand in a bit more detail for Salt Spring constituents, and certainly appreciate the projects that have just been referenced in relation to Salt Spring. Right now, the Islands Trust on Salt Spring has, in effect, put a moratorium on enforcement of bylaws in relation to various units that would be out of compliance, because to enforce the bylaws would effectively put constituents into a homeless situation. So the contribution that's been made is certainly much appreciated. The question I'm curious about through the chair is that if there are, say, roughly 1,500 Salt Spring Islanders who are living on boats or in trailers that are not safe and so on, that's a large number of residents that we need to address. The short-term rental registry decision or request certainly helps in part. The question that I'd appreciate some further guidance on is if there were $200 million as a hypothetical available for affordable housing in rural communities around the province, how leaving aside specific applications, how is that allocated? What are the criteria governing the allocation of those funds in particular envelopes for particular parts of rural BC?
Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a fair question. It's one of the discussions that we've had. In fact, we made this change with the last CHF call. We heard from many not-for-profits that there was a concern that they didn't want to be competing against Vancouver, because Vancouver had the greater capacity to have better applications, have more dollars to put in, etc. So last CHF call, we made the change to have a certain amount of allocated units per region, and then the applications are only competing against their region. They're not competing against the entire province. And we saw some good success with that. And our intention is with the next CHF call to do the similar thing. I can't give the member the exact breakdown numbers for the next CHF call. We're still in development, but we will use the same formula to ensure that there's a region and there's an allocation of units, and then the competition is within that region. So the region benefits by knowing they're going to be having those many units going forward.
Thank you, Minister. House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Minister. In a couple of examples that I was provided by constituents in the riding last year was that the call for proposals, they learned later on after making the proposal or the application that they would have had a better chance of succeeding if they had teamed up with a First Nation or an Indigenous partner, as opposed to proceeding without the benefit of an Indigenous partner. And it was a bit of hindsight is 2020 as far as they were concerned. So I'm just wondering through the chair if there's ways to ensure that criteria like that potential applicants are aware of those criteria before they apply, so that they can put the best possible application forward.
Recognizing the Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Chair. We do provide feedback to anyone that's not successful, and although I can't comment on specific application, we don't have enough of the information, but there's usually various reasons why some projects don't score as high. And you know, if you've got significant housing pressures, we know that often there's a disproportionate impact felt by Indigenous communities, by, say, racialized communities. So that is one of the reasons why the feedback may have been that way. Again, I'm presuming because I wasn't present in those discussions. One of the main things that we do look at, though, is the project shovel ready? Do they have council on board? Do they have the approvals? Are they ready to go? And that's a challenge that some proponents have when they come forward, that they don't have that. They don't have the zoning done. They're not prepared in that sense. They're prepared because they want to see it happen, but they don't have all the ducks in a row. So we always advise anyone that is considering to apply to meet with their local council. And you know, my experience has been that, you know, I would say majority of councils that I've been able to work with, when they know it's an affordable housing project, they will do what they can to prepare to get that there. And so that is an instrumental piece. Again, I'm not saying that's the specific case, but generally that's some of the feedback we provide. And if anyone doesn't succeed, we do provide them information about what they could do to strengthen their application and be prepared for future calls.
Thank you, Minister. House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. I will switch my line of questioning momentarily, but I do have one other question, which is that through this process of applying and having a project that's shovel ready, there can be instances where the local government, whether it's a municipality, whether it's the Islands Trust, has provided all the land use planning approvals necessary, and these nonprofits have put the effort in, often with the support of the province to prepare the application. And it's not unlike a real estate transaction with subject to clauses. And the way I mean that is that it may be 99% shovel ready, but there is a need to, and the getting it to 100% is partially having the tentative approval from BC Housing, which then enables the nonprofit to deal with another issue so I'll give you an example. There's a project in my constituency which is shovel ready that could make an application tomorrow, and there is a road access issue where the applicant, the nonprofit, will be able to get the funding to build that road access, but it's contingent on knowing that BC Housing approval is in place. So it's a bit chicken and the egg, and I'm just curious through the chair how BC Housing and the minister deal with those sort of situations where it's very real that it will get funded, that additional bit of infrastructure, but it needs to know that everybody needs to know that the project has been approved, and then the funding will come from that, not from the province, but from private donors.
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons why we have now a rolling call is to address those types of challenges where you're almost there, but you're not quite there, and now it's because there's going to be some steady rollout to it. It gives those types of situations the opportunity. But there also are challenges where local governments say, well, we approve of the housing, but we don't yet approve the people. So that's something we have to push back against as best we can, where everyone is supportive of the housing until they find out what incomes people are coming in with. And then, stigmatize people, they stigmatize the project. And so those are some of the challenges that we try to deal with. And so for us, of course, we want to see an understanding from the local government that they want that housing. They understand that, there's going to be some more vulnerable people there, low-income seniors, et cetera. But the rolling call will help. And, we'll have to navigate any challenges that come, but I think that'll be an important step to help along the way.
Thank you, Minister. House Leader of the third party.
One of the things I like about estimates, Mr. Chair, is hearing my name as House Leader mentioned repeatedly through the afternoon. It almost makes me wish I could ask 100 questions rather than maybe only 25 or 30. It's very good for my heart. Thank you.
Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the items that I'm sure has been canvassed prior to this section of the estimates, but I think would be helpful to maybe summarize or go through in some detail is the issue of municipal infrastructure. And now we have a government in place federally that with Prime Minister Carney and certainly has indicated a high degree of ambition to address housing and infrastructure needs across Canada. And in the case of municipal infrastructure and local government infrastructure, there's going to be a couple of different situations. There will be the situation which we've canvassed in previous parts of these estimates where the infrastructure is already in place, there's overcrowding in housing, so the infrastructure, whether it's sewer, water, whatever it is already servicing the community, but it's more about creating a healthy, safe housing environment than it is about lack of actual infrastructure. And it's also about, for affordable housing, ensuring we're accommodating residents that are already in the community. This isn't about creating the infrastructure to support an influx of new $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million houses in a part of a community where more individuals are coming. This is about folks that are already there, they want to work in the community, and they're looking for affordable housing. And from the municipality's perspective or the local government's perspective, there's an infrastructure gap. So the UBCM estimates that municipalities need $24 billion during the next decade just to replace core infrastructure, and how they will accommodate infrastructure upgrades that are reasonably needed to support the housing growth that is resulting from this government's, I would say, innovative policies. And so through the chair to the minister, what is the government's plan to address the infrastructure deficit in municipalities? And secondly, what is the government's plan of action in terms of engagement with the federal government to ensure that the federal government steps up to the table to help close that gap as well?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'll start by saying I thank the House Leader of the third party. I think I'll just make a comment on that, which is to say we forget how big of an honor it is to be in this place. And when you hear MLA for Abbotsford, MLA for White Rock, when you hear these things, it's our reminder that we have an honor to serve the people of this province. And so for you to take a moment to reflect on that, I think is something we all appreciate on this side, and something all of us should appreciate because we're here temporarily. And so appreciate your comment on that. Part of the changes we made last year around small-scale multi-unit, around transit-oriented development, was on the principle that the best use of our existing infrastructure is housing where the infrastructure already exists. And our legislation was built around the notion of not wanting to encourage sprawl beyond where communities had already decided where their growth, the terms are going to be urban containment areas. And so, you know, we have seen research, Metro Vancouver had research that showed that this type of housing was the best use of the existing infrastructure to get more housing. We have, as the member has asked, had a really good relationship with the federal government when it comes to infrastructure. We always want more. It always feels like it's not enough. But whether it's our government or it was the government before us, there's been a lot of work to align our programs with the federal government, because local governments find it frustrating to have to apply one place and then try to piecemeal it from another level of government. We had two funds in particular. One, it was provincial. We provided $1 billion, part of the growing community funds, to local governments. We didn't prescribe what they can use the money for. The local governments made a decision of where they wanted to allocate those dollars. For example, in the members' community, Sydney was provided $3.82 million, and I believe they did some work with the waterfront washrooms, the Philip Brother Park Playground, Beacon West Roundabout, and so they put those dollars to use to help improve the infrastructure. And so that work's happening. One of the important pieces that infrastructure is definitely on the top of our list in our discussions with the federal government. It was on the top of the list before. It's on the top of the list now. I shared with members yesterday that our top asks to the federal government are infrastructure dollars. Money around Indigenous housing is one of those top priorities as well. And we'll see. We'll see what they come through with. Our goal will be to try to align as best we can with them. The federal government had a community housing infrastructure fund. The federal government launched this in, I think it was May or June last year. We spent a lot of time negotiating with the federal government around how we could contribute to that pot of money and leverage that for local governments. We were not successful. and we were not successful in the entirety of the fund. The federal government was able to get Metro Vancouver $250 million on the condition that Metro Vancouver agree to put 2-year in-stream protection in place so that more projects could proceed and make some changes to how DCCs are collected. So that was an example of how you can make sure local governments have infrastructure dollars, but at the same time ensure that projects can still pencil and proceed. We tried to negotiate for the rest of those dollars, but we were unsuccessful, mainly because we couldn't agree with the criteria that was set. They were hoping for a 3-year freeze of DCCs across the province, and local governments have greater infrastructure needs than the dollars the federal government was willing to put to the table. So we advised them that it's best that they work with local governments directly. That being said, that was before the election. It was a different government, different prime minister, and I'm looking forward to when a new minister of housing or a new minister of infrastructure is announced to be able to have a meeting at their earliest convenience to discuss how we can continue to build our infrastructure to support housing in our communities.
Thank you very much, Minister. House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Minister. In the work that UBCM has done, they've identified the gap as being $24 billion over the next 10 years. Through the chair to the minister, is that in accord with your understanding of the funding challenge funding gap we need to close? And are there options, as a second part of that question, are there options to develop a more consistent and reliable funding formula rather than a grant-based system of infrastructure funding?
Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Chair. It's hard to get to an exact number. Many variables that are linked to why it's a challenge. One is that local governments' needs change often. They could identify certain amenities they need, some sewer and water infrastructure upgrades they need. There's some communities that have needs and some have wants because they have desires to grow their community in a certain way. So it's ever changing, so it's hard to come to an exact number of what it is, but there is significant needs in community. And part of our discussion with the federal government will be, well, how do we have something consistent that can support communities as they grow? Of course, local governments also depend on DCCs and ACCs. Maybe it's a good time to touch on that, which is just to say that there has been challenges from local government on how they collect fees. Those in the home building community argue, and I think in some cases justifiably, that the fees are just too high to have anything be built in the community. And so part of our changes was to make a shift from how housing decisions are made. This is prior to this new session. We brought in legislation to change that. And because we have moved to more pre-planning, now communities are required every 5 years to update their official community plans. Engage with the community. Where do you want the housing? Where do you want the parks? Where do you want the amenities? And any project that comes forward that fits within what the community had agreed upon doesn't have public hearings anymore. So that means that, you know, the ability to negotiate and extract dollars is not the same. The ACC tool allows local governments to still collect dollars for amenities, but they're required now to identify what the amenities are, put it into their bylaws so everyone knows the money is going to this. They are allowed to charge for net new. So you can't say, here's 10 units, we're going to build 10 units, and all of a sudden you have to pay for the new playground for new people when the amount of people are the same. So it's net new. And the fees are more transparent. And I think that's good for the home building community, and I think it's good for elected officials too. Because the number one thing I hear from people, and I think mostly unjustifiable, mostly not correct, maybe in some cases it is correct, is that that one developer is getting a better deal than another one because all of this is being negotiated in closed doors, not in public. And so there's always this doubt in people's mind. Why are they doing that for that developer and they're not doing it for this? Or what kind of arrangement? Did they support them financially? And I think that undermines our democracy. And so to have an ability for a local government to say, these are the amenities we want in our communities, here's the dollars we need, here's what we're going to need to collect per unit for net new units, and be transparent about it, I think it's better for everybody. And that's the direction we're heading. And so I think that certainty will help everyone involved, and it helps the local government, it helps people in our community to understand that these are the amenities that we're prioritizing. So it is a holistic change of how things have been done. And if you include the additional dollars, like we provided $1 billion last year directly to local governments as well as First Nations for infrastructure, that's a significant investment. Some of the largest investments ever made, in fact, for infrastructure. And then I'll add on top of that, the investments we're making in transit, investments we're making into 911 calling, the investments we're making into direct into water and sewer facilities. So we continue to make historic investments, but we're going to continue to do more, but it's going to involve a partnership with the federal government.
Thank you, Minister. House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Chair, one of the approaches that has been taken in other jurisdictions around Canada and certainly south of the border as well, and it goes by various names, so I'll just describe it, is that when you put in major infrastructure, for example, a SkyTrain line or a new road through an area, it can often raise the land values in the adjacent properties. And so what in effect happens is that the landowners adjacent to the corridor receive a windfall in terms of the value of the property. And one of the measures that other jurisdictions have taken, and I may not be, maybe it's happening in BC and I'm unaware of it, is that there are tax policies and approaches taken to recover some of that windfall, because effectively what's happened is that the public have subsidized through their taxes the upgrade in infrastructure, but the benefit goes to adjacent properties. And really, you know, it would be appropriate from a public policy point of view that some of that windfall, if you will, is returned to defray the cost of the upgrade of the infrastructure. And so my question through the chair is, to the minister is, has that type of approach to funding or recovering the cost of important public infrastructure being considered, or would it be considered?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So the member's description could be two things. One, it could be land value capture with a lift of the value of the land. And that's Ministry of Finance would do that work. And I know that we've done work to enable local governments to be able to capture some of that value. And so it's a better question for the Ministry of Finance of where that work is proceeding. The other way that could be looked at is around inclusionary zoning and capturing some sort of value from a project for maybe it's affordable housing, maybe it's cash in lieu. We have provided in the legislative change that we did the ability for local governments, especially in transit-oriented development areas, to do that. But the requirement for them is to do a feasibility study to ensure that any inclusionary policy they're putting in place does not deter development. And we do that because a change in Vancouver will be different than a change in Burnaby, if we change in Surrey and in a different community. And so having one standard policy just wouldn't work given the different dynamics within communities. But the ability is there for local governments to do that. But it's vitally important that I emphasize it requires a feasibility study to ensure that it doesn't deter development, because it's easy to say that project right there, it's going to be 6 stories. We want 50% affordable housing. I just use a number. Let's say 20%. But if the project still can't pencil at that price point, you essentially just kill the project. And so we want local governments to have the ability to have inclusionary zoning policies, but we don't want it to be a poison pill where it's used to deter development in communities. So finding that balance is something that we tried to strike in there. So there's the 2 pieces. So we do inclusionary policy, enable local governments, land value lift. I know there's discussions happening in TransLink as well and other around the authorities looking at that. But that would be something that we wouldn't directly look at. It would be the Ministry of Finance.
House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to shift gears now to local housing models funding. There's a variety of local housing models to ensure that the distinct needs of a community can be attended to, rather than using a one-size-fits-all approach. And I know we've, on a number of occasions, had helpful discussions around the village model that is implemented in Duncan and other similar models around the province. I'm particularly interested in tiny home communities like the Bluegrass Meadows Micro Village, and through the chair to the minister, what types of funding are there in this budget directed towards local and alternative housing models, and has this been expanded since last fiscal year?
Minister of Housing.
Chair. And I know the member's passionate about this topic because we've had opportunities to speak about it. And there's a lot of interest around tiny homes in communities as well. The member is well aware that we have a tiny home village, so to speak, in Cowichan and in Victoria. And we have expanded tiny homes in Kelowna and Campbell River. And it's important to know that tiny homes work in some communities, but they don't work in some communities. They work on some lots, but they don't work on some lots. It's not the one solution that fits for everyone, but it may be a good solution for some communities. And BC Housing has been very flexible in ensuring that different models be considered in different communities. And now, part of our agreement with the BC Greens, we will be able to expand that, and we'll be looking to expand that. It won't necessarily be tiny homes in every community, because some communities are not interested in that, and they would like to do a different structure. But that option is available for the communities that are interested in doing so. I can share with the member that we have increased funding for Heart and Hearth, 44 million in capital, 227 million in operating for this type of model. And we've had some big success. We have some, I look at Kelowna and what's happening in Kelowna, where, we're going to have close to just over 120 units within the next few weeks. They're seeing over 60% of people going into this supportive housing, getting wraparound supports, learning, doing important life skills, getting IDs, connecting, getting a chance to work, reconnect with family. We've seen over 60% of people move in and already establish themselves in different opportunities or connect with work. So that's big success. We've been rolling these units out, as the member is aware, in Campbell River. We have communities that were fighting us because they didn't want this type of housing in their community, now calling us and saying, can we have it? Because people have realized that the only way you can address homelessness is by addressing the fact that we don't have enough housing. And I often will say this, and I mean it, which is the problem isn't homeless people. The problem is that they're homeless because there's no housing. So that's our responsibility, is to scale up housing opportunities in communities. And we've had some success. We're going to do more because of the agreement that we have with the BC Greens. And certainly hope to be able to share more of those details with the member very soon.
Thank you, Minister. House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chair. the whole issue of and topic of building codes has been canvassed fairly extensively over the period of budget estimates. On Saturna Island and in parts of the riding in Sydney and North Saanich, there is active discussion around supporting young families starting out or folks in their 20s who want to build and I'll call it a tiny home, and the from their perspective, and certainly getting this feedback from some of the local governments, and the CRD, the requirements, building code requirements for what would be a very small house, but enables folks to get into the housing market and live where they work, appear to them to be quite onerous. And so the question through the chair is, has there been consideration to relaxing some of the requirements under the code in relation to what are fairly, very modest, tiny starter homes?
Minister.
Thank you so much, Chair. I appreciate the members raising this. I think it's important to start by saying that a complete home not built well is just as dangerous as a tiny home not built well. And so right now, tiny homes are being built, and they are throughout the communities, throughout the province. But they require a level of safety to ensure that they're safe. And so, we do hear from some local governments who say it's the building code that's the reason why we can't do the tiny home. But there are a lot of communities where there's tiny homes, but they're not to code. And I'll give the member an example. We had in Prince George, at Moxton Flats, we had a homeless encampment. We had almost 100 people a year ago. A lot of people struggling to get into housing. And so we had an agreement with Prince George, an MOU, that said we were going to deploy 140 homes in that community. Everything from modular to purchasing if we need to. And we now have a handful of people left on Moxton Flats, and they've been offered housing, but they haven't chosen it. But during that process, we had a tiny home manufacturer from Alberta say, we're going to come in and we're going to provide tiny homes to the community. And if the province can't get that, we're going to do it. And they came in, so to speak, illegally and put some tiny homes down. Within 2 weeks, there was a fire, and we lost those tiny homes. And I didn't hear from that company again. And so what's vitally important to me is that we're always looking at the building code, but if it's going to put people's lives at risk, I will not be the minister that signs off on it. It's the same thing I hear about seismic. I hear people say that the new seismic code, which is going to have a big impact here on the island, which essentially is research from the National Research Council that says specific types of soils require different types of building structures. So I hear from folks in the home building community say that's going to put a lot of costs on us. But I always say, do you agree with the research that it could be dangerous? And they say yes. And I say, well then, what are we discussing here? Why don't we find innovative ways to find solutions around that? But let's make sure we do it in a safe way. And that's the same with tiny homes. So, but if there are suggestions that the member has on the code where the member hears ideas of how it can be done in a safe way, but ensure that more of them can be deployed, I'm all ears. I'm very open to that. And so if the member hears that, please do bring that forward.
Host Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Minister. I'll certainly take you up on that offer. We have some folks in our riding that I think have some fairly creative ideas that respect the need for safety and seismic and all of the reasons you have a code. So thank you for that offer. We've talked at some length about speculation and vacancy tax, and had a fairly vigorous exchange this morning on this issue through question period. We certainly in the Green Caucus support the speculation and vacancy tax and the approach that's being taken from a policy perspective. Through the chair, we would appreciate what information the minister could describe about the housing that is being created, or what the minister sees as the future capacity or potential for the housing being created through this tax, and how that tax collected might be deployed to support affordable housing.
Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Chair. And this was canvassed yesterday with the official opposition as well. The speculation tax is with the Ministry of Finance, so they've got all the information. It's led by the Ministry of Finance. I'll just make a comment just to say that it's been one of the most effective policies to get more housing back in the market. It's a very simple premise. If you have investment properties and you leave them empty, you pay the tax. If you have investment properties and you don't pay taxes in British Columbia, you pay the tax. And in fact, if people are renting their properties out and not leaving them empty, they're not paying the tax, and it's good for us because it means more housing available. And members aware, because you heard the debate this morning, you know, in Metro Vancouver alone, we had more than 20,000 units come onto the market for people to rent. That's remarkable. If you think of how much it would cost us to build 20,000 homes, and how long it would take us, billions of dollars. One tax policy brought those homes back available for people in our communities. So, you know, what I would say is it's a huge success. In fact, when I was traveling through the interior, I remember meeting with one of the mayors in the interior who told me that close to 54% of all of their mailings for their notices go outside the community. It's pretty remarkable for a community that wants to operate, have a community where a majority of their tax filings are heading to people that don't even live in the community. And they were asking us, how do we get in? We want to make sure that our housing is for the people in our community, make sure our kids have a place to live because they're struggling and thinking about leaving the community, leaving the province, when we have housing right here and it's sitting empty. So that's just my view on it. That's our government's view on it. But the actual tax measures are better situated for the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Minister. House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Minister. And this may be more of confirming this is also a topic to be canvassed with the Minister of Finance. But what we've seen in the riding is constituents who are starting out in the housing market, who are facing the challenge of meeting the mortgage and meeting all the various commitments that come with new home ownership. I'll digress for a moment and say that I have a certain amount of empathy for these folks, because when we bought our first house on Bowen Island many years ago, long before the internet, we had to cancel our subscription for Granada TV in order to pay the mortgage. And that was one of the best things we ever did, because our daughter grew up without TV, and I think she's better for it. But that's a digression. Back to the question. The question is that these young families that want to get into the house market, they need that extra helper in terms of rent, and you know, in compliance with all zoning, they would be looking at adding a suite or finding some other rent helper. And often the obstacle to doing that is, for them, it's just that one step too far in terms of that $10,000 or $15,000 to actually create the suite fully up to code. And so through the chair to the minister, is this a question that you can consider, or should I save it for the Minister of Finance in terms of setting up some form of loan guarantee program or something that enables the government to both assist that initial investment and also get it returned in due course?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you so much, Chair. I was smiling at the member when he was describing his child not having TV. I had the opposite moment with my kid, who I had my grandma visiting about 10 years ago, visiting my home, and my son called me at work and said, "Dad, you won't believe what we have here. We have a cell phone with a wire that goes into the wall." And I realized pretty quick he was talking about a landline, you know, those things we used to have. So yeah, it's rough. Times do move. So I'm very sympathetic to the point the members made as well. We hear from a lot of families in my community who say, "I've got a home, and I just want to put a little accessory dwelling unit in the back so my kids can be near me. I want my grandkids near me. I don't want to have to travel. And if I can do that, that would be easy." But there's a lot of challenges to be able to do that. There are some building code challenges, which I'm looking at right now, to find ways to make it easier to ensure the safety, but ensure that it's a smoother process. There's the federal government. We had a program, but we canceled the program because the federal government program is, and what's coming and what they're offering is just way better than what we're able to provide. So there is going to be the financing piece. But I think that a major part of the solution will be two-parter. One is more set designs, I wouldn't say pre-approved, but pre-reviewed designs. Is that the right term? Okay, pre-reviewed. Planners don't like pre-approved. They like pre-reviewed designs, because that standardization allows for those that build these modules through manufacturing, et cetera, to be able to create the efficiency to be able to make it cheaper. If they're constantly creating different designs, it's expensive, but if they have a whole host of set designs, they're able to produce them and drop the cost considerably. So that's one of the things that we're rolling out, but it will make a big difference. The other one is from the city local government perspective. Every local government has different rules. And when you have every local government has different rules, different height, different law coverage, it's hard for those that are manufacturing to create the scale to be able to lower the cost. So we do need some standardization. We put a set design guidelines out to local governments and said, here's what you all should be doing. This is the best standard. And it was done by a planner who won provincial-wide awards for his green planning. He was the chief planner at the City of Vancouver, and award after award for his sustainability lens on planning. And one of the things they highlight is the need to standardize both the zoning from local governments, but also the templates of what these units can look like. So we're doing some work on that. We have some more work to do because it's all over the map still. But we do need to set some basic, I think, requirements for local governments to say, here's what it should be at a minimum. You can go much more than that if you want, so that we can create standardization so that our industries can respond to lower costs for young families, for families that want their kids nearby, or for people that are thinking, hey, you know what? I have a home. I can put a little unit in the backyard. I'll live in the unit in part of my retirement, and I can rent the rest of the house out to another family. There's just different things you can do with it. And last thing I'll say is that if you look at California, who brought in similar changes to us, they were a little bit more, I would say, aggressive on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. I think the last stat I saw was in LA, 33% of all the new building permits were accessory dwelling units. People said, this is much quicker. I'm just going to put one of these ADUs in my yard, and I have some families living in it. So there's huge potential in it. We are going to explore that as we go forward.
House Leader of the third party.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. And Mr. Chair, that's certainly very promising. And there's a bit of a carve-out that I'd like to explore a bit more, which is in my riding, and I think it's probably similar around the province, young families will look at a house these days and it'll be, in some cases, fairly large. And large, this may sound small to some these days, but from their perspective, 2,500 square feet or something, and it has a basement. And the basement, they could add a one-bedroom suite to code in the basement, but once they figure out the cost of acquiring that house, it's not about building a separate unit, it's about renovating within the existing footprint of the house to code. They just look at it and they say, well, it's just one step too far. But if we had some financial assistance or a loan guarantee or something, so that, and not everybody has parents with deep pockets, that they could actually add housing, a one-bedroom, say, or a studio. It would be a mortgage helper, and it would also help address the shortage of housing generally in that affordability range. And I wasn't, maybe I missed, maybe that was addressed in your response, Minister, but that's an area where I think there's a huge opportunity, certainly in parts of my riding, to add housing stock at low cost and certainly see the government's assistance returned in due course. So I'd be curious for your thoughts on that, Minister, through the chair.
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. I tried to touch that on the beginning of my answer, which is, we had the secondary suite program, which offered up to $40,000, and the federal government came in after and said, we have a program that's $80,000, low-cost financing, 2% interest rate over 15-year amortization. So, in order to be efficient with dollars, why have a program that's half the dollars that the federal government has? So I think that would address the piece that the member is referring to.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The First-Time Homebuyers Program allows people to get property transfer exemptions if the property has a fair market value of $835,000 or less, yet the average price of homes in BC is around $965,000, creating a barrier for entry into home ownership. Through the chair, would the minister consider raising the property value cap for first-time home buyers to reflect increasing housing costs?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. That again is finance. Tax measures are always with Ministry of Finance, and so that's better situated there.
House Leader of the Third Party.
And through the chair to the minister, when I raise it with the Minister of Finance, can I say that the Minister of Housing is highly supportive of an increase?
Minister.
When you raise it with the Minister of Finance, please mention that I'm looking for a lot more dollars for affordable housing as well.
Member from Saanich North and the Islands.
Can through the chair, can the minister speak to the estimated revenue from the school tax and what portion of revenues from the additional school tax that applies to high-valued residential properties? And related, does this government have, this may be finance again, but anyway, have any intent to expand the additional school tax rate, such as by adding additional brackets to account for high-value residential portions assessed over $5 million?
Minister of Housing.
This will be the shortest answer I give you today, but it is Ministry of Finance as well.
Third Party House Leader.
When the flipping tax was launched last year, the Minister of Housing and the Premier identified that the tax was expected to make over $40 million in revenue and would also help free up more homes. Through the chair, can the minister tell us how much revenue has been made from the flipping tax so far and estimated tax revenues for this fiscal?
Minister.
Thank you again. All tax measures are with the Ministry of Finance. Our ministry doesn't handle those measures.
House Leader of the third party.
A key issue with attracting and retaining healthcare workers in this province is the lack of affordable housing options available to them. And as an example, I can use both Salt Spring Island and Sydney as examples where the challenge associated with increasing access to primary health care and increasing access, increasing attachment in both Sydney and Salt Spring Island, attachment of constituents to doctors is not, interestingly enough, a lack of doctors, not a shortage of doctors. It's a shortage of housing for doctors and the health professionals that support the doctors. And so, as with many issues, they're interlinked. Through the chair, can the minister describe this government's plan or approach to providing affordable housing specifically for healthcare workers, because that is the obstacle to significantly increasing attachment?
Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you so much, Chair. And the member is very right. It's a major challenge for a lot of communities who are trying to attract the skilled workforce, whether they're healthcare professionals, whether they're working in local government planning, whether they're firefighters, police officers, the list goes on. Traditionally, historically, BC Housing has been in the space of supportive housing and maybe more low-income housing. And we have really expanded it with BC Builds, and it's targeted to very much what the members just highlighted. The first project we announced was with the City of North Vancouver. The City of North Vancouver came forward with land, and they had identified that their biggest priority was that the biggest challenge that they were dealing with was that because of the North Shore, the lack of housing, the high cost of housing, they couldn't attract the healthcare workers to work at the hospital. And C-SPAN, which pays really well, was struggling to attract workers to work for them because they couldn't get housing, and people were commuting long distance over the bridges, etc. So there's a whole host of projects that are being built through BC Builds, which targets middle-income families. I know the threshold is around $89,000 income to up to $190,000 for family incomes. And so the reason why we got to that space is to address the very challenge. So we have a whole host of projects. I can share with the member that North Vanc's project is very much focusing on that type of workforce. We've got a project in Gibsons that's being developed by a not-for-profit, operated by Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society, which is going to be 33 homes, 4-story building, with childcare built into it. That's going to be focused on that. We have Whistler, and we, even in the members' writing, if the members are aware of the units at the Drake that are being built for supportive housing, there's part of that also has some units that are workforce related, because it's a challenge for us. And we also have this conversation around downtown east side, the units are going to be there, what are we going to do? but a lot of the not-for-profits that operate, their workforce can't afford to live there anymore, and they're moving out. So we do need to do more of this BC Builds opportunity, but that's really what that program was launched for. It's launched to ensure that there's housing that's below market for workforce housing that meets people's needs and their incomes of where they're at.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Minister. And Mr. Chair, the work in the riding that is taking place on is much appreciated, and as the Minister will know, as part of our accord with the NDP government, we are collaborating on a study on community health centers and how to expand community health centers across the province. And so many of these issues are multi-ministry, and so through the chair to the minister, it would be helpful, I can phrase this as a question, it would be very helpful to discuss how best to plug your ministry's senior people into that study, because it's going to be the obstacle to many community health center expansions.
Minister of Housing.
Thank you so much, Chair. The BC Builds program is built with a lot of flexibility in that it's very possible that you have healthcare below and housing above. So, in fact, we have projects that are being worked on where there's a fire hall below and housing above. And I know some people think, how can you have a fire hall and then housing above it? But it's possible. And Victoria is an example where we built affordable housing above a fire hall, and when the fire bells go, all the lights turn red. So actually people in the neighborhood don't actually hear any fire trucks because the trucks can get out with no cars moving. So there's other communities that are looking to build community centers. We're even considering a school being built with housing above it. So this is the future, and we are, BC Builds is well suited, and actually is working really well for local governments, because local governments are thinking, they're concerned, a lot of local governments' concern was, we have land, but one day we wanted to build X, one day we wanted to build Y. And now when they get our money through our growing community fund, now they can take those dollars to advance their project, and then we can come in and put housing on top. So, you know, I think I'll be following very closely to the work the member is doing with the Ministry of Health. And if there are opportunities, then we'll certainly look to leverage those.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Minister. We have discussed exclusionary zoning to a certain extent this afternoon. So let me just frame the question this way. While the government has made commitments to expand non-market housing and upzoning, current exclusionary zoning regulations often make non-market housing developments unaffordable and unnecessarily arduous. This is most evident in Vancouver, where apartments are still not allowed on more than 3/4 of the city's residential land. The question through the chair to the minister is the minister working, or will the minister be working to implement province-wide initiatives in a tailored way to end exclusionary zoning for non-market housing?
Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Chair. It is an important topic, and obviously we've done a lot of work in this space, and we're going to do more. And it goes to my comment I made earlier, which is, I said this yesterday, and I mean it, which is that, you know, if you were to go to a affordable housing rally with people in a community, they would say, "What do we want? Affordable housing. Where do you want it?" And then it's dead silent. No, nobody has a second piece to that. And so the exclusionary challenges are real, because too often it's not the housing that's the problem, it's who is coming into the housing. And so there are policies. Our zoning laws have a history of being designed not to limit housing, but to limit people and certain types of people. And you know, we just have to come to grips with that, and that's a reality. And so part of our work has been, to this point, to move to local governments. It starts with our housing needs, and it starts with housing targets. We have given communities housing targets, and it's not just go and build whatever you need. It's saying, you know, here's how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms you need to be a full, complete community. You need supportive housing, you need affordable housing. That has fundamentally shifted the conversation in communities. Instead of not-for-profits begging to get attention of elected officials now are going to not-for-profits and saying, we have to reach these targets, how can we work together to do it? I think that's healthy. That's a healthy start. And then now that local governments must update their OCPs to their housing needs, now they have to start planning their official community plans with a lens of where is this housing going to go, and have it approved up front. So then when we get to the process of these projects coming forward, we're not debating whether these people should be living in our community, but more thinking about a community as a whole. So we are doing a lot of work in this space. We have more work to do, and part of that is leadership from elected officials. And you know, I was praising my critic from Surrey. When she was mayor, she took a really tough stance in our community. Said, "Yeah, we need to have housing for people. It's the only way to support people. But we need to have those things across the province, and that means pushing back against stigma, and not stigmatizing people even more. And I'm definitely not referring to the member, because I know he's a champion of this housing. But we are doing lots of work. And we have more work to do."
House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Minister. Electrification of new buildings is a vital step to reach net zero emissions, as buildings were the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada in 2019. My question through the chair to the minister is, does this government have a plan for the electrification of new housing developments? And has the minister considered establishing a clear time-limited plan to work to implement a province-wide policy to prevent oil and gas hookups to new buildings where electricity is available?
Minister.
Thank you so much, Chair. There's a lot of work happening in this space. First off, we made changes last year to ensure that all stratas are doing an analysis of their buildings portfolio to ensure that they have, to assess what energy capacity they have. That's a good baseline, an important baseline. We made changes to ensure that if someone were to want to build a charging station in a strata building, that there was an easier process for them to be able to do that. Right now, we are making some of the largest increases in hydro and electric capacity in the province. We have legislation in front of the House, which I won't go into, which allows us to expedite more energy in our province to be able to meet that housing demand and our demand for electrification. But we need to do that in order to have this. And I would say that there's not a discussion about a blanket across the province at this stage, but there is work happening to ensure that we have electricity to meet the demand in our housing market. And there's conversations in communities in each community, they're slightly different. So our focus right now is to build up the capacity. I don't want to go too much into estimates for the Minister of Energy. I'll leave that to him. I'm busy enough with my file. But I will say that we're doing changes around code, around working with BC Hydro to ensure that power is being provided to projects as we go forward. If I can use this moment just to share with the member that we've also launched a digital permitting hub. And the digital permitting hub, I think, is going to be over time a game changer for communities. And essentially, it's digitizing the building code so that when an application is, a building permit application is submitted, within seconds it can check to see if it's code compliant. It can check to see if it's energy compliant. The province has a sense of where energy portfolios are of the buildings. And we're looking to partner with BC Hydro so that BC Hydro can get information on building permits right away as well, so that it allows them to prepare to provide energy in a quick and efficient way. And I think those are good incentives to help drive more electrification in home building as we go forward.
Recognizing the MLA from Saanich North and the Islands.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. We've canvassed this to some extent in previous parts of the estimates, but the construction's trades workforce is facing a significant labor shortage, with approximately 11,500 construction jobs currently unfilled in BC, and certainly, you know, prefabricated houses and so on is part of the solution. A question through the chair to the minister is, what is this ministry's approach to closing that gap, since that can make a huge difference to our ability to close the housing gap?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you so much, Chair. The member is correct that there's no one solution to the housing crisis, and every solution involves lots of different moving pieces, and skills trades training is critical to do that. We have been expanding trades training at a considerable rate. We have more to do. We have been doing a lot of education in schools to remind young people that this is a good career to get into, and push back against perhaps misconceptions of what the work is and what it's not. I remember laughing with my dad about 15 years ago when I was working at banking and stressed out all the time, and my best friend was an electrician, and I remember saying to him, "You told me not to get into trades, and look how happy he is," you know? But it's a great career field, so we're doing work there. We've been using the limited numbers we have from the federal government on immigration to fast-track trades to immigrate here. We have been expanding small-scale multi-unit and housing near transit, lower density housing, because the skills that are required to build that housing are different than the bigger developments, and we have more access to trades in that space. So expanding there it's an easier space to do that. We're putting less pressure on our labor force. And prefabrication is the future. Mass timber is the future. I was fortunate enough when I was in the Ministry of Jobs to be able to put together the Mass Timber Action Plan. And it is still as relevant today as it was then. So part of moving that forward is doing the things we're doing, using government procurement to help drive that demand and that change. But it requires more work, especially in the small space, the accessory dwelling units, all this. We need more standardization. I know the member mentioned earlier standardization. We need some minimums. And that's what we try to do with the site standard document we released. Just let's have minimums so that industry can scale up and produce at large scale the amount of housing at the minimum. And if local governments say we want to go higher, that's great. That's up to them. They want to do a bigger footprint, that's up to them. But let's have some minimums that are thought out so that industry can scale up the production to be able to meet that demand and lower the cost over time. And I'm passionate about this. I know members are probably passionate about this. This is key to addressing our housing crisis. And those of us that have seen how fast a mass timber building can be put together, it's remarkable. North Vancouver, the city, is now the champion, the leader. Vancouver used to be. Now it's North Vancouver City. They've got amazing amount of buildings coming online. And I said to the mayor, why are you so happy about this? And she said, BC product, we're using sustainable products in our buildings. That's what people in our community are demanding. Addressing embodied carbon. And it's being done in a way faster time frame, less trades on site, and less complaints from the public because there's no noise because everything's being done off site. It's just being assembled there. So I just think it's the future. The federal government is doing some work in the larger building space for preset designs of buildings, which will help. But it's going to require us to do some more work on standardizing minimums for a small-scale multi-unit, for accessory dwelling units, so that we can see industry scale up.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Minister and Mr. Chair. We have pretty much reached the conclusion of the memorable part of estimates, being the Green Caucus's presentation. How's that, Corky? And I do have one more question, but before I pose this question, I do want to thank the Minister and the Minister's staff and all the public servants in the Ministry of Housing, Municipal Affairs, and BC Housing who have contributed to very helpful answers and detailed answers to the questions we've raised. So earlier today, there was some significant and extensive discussion around cats, and it occurred to me that that's is an emerging, fairly major issue in the province, and so I thought I'd conclude with this question, which is, this government included a commitment to get rid of no pet clauses for purpose-built rental apartment buildings, which excludes pet owners from rental housing. And so through the chair to the minister, can the minister describe the timeline and plan for implementing this commitment and what funding exists for this so that we can have cats and dogs everywhere in the province?
Minister.
Thank you so much, Chair. We are going to be doing some consultation with landlord groups, with tenant groups, to do a better assessment of what does this mean, how do we go forward. We haven't started that yet. I can't give the member a firm timeline, although we are committed to it in our mandate. And when I have a better update, I certainly will share that with the member.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. Those are my questions.